Hey everybody, Taylor here to talk about the Nexus 6 and the Note 4. Hope you got a chance to check out the last video of the Note 3 versus the Note 4 that my buddy Paul Felix did. And like I said before, I have the brand new Nexus 6 and he was gracious enough to let me borrow his Note 4 for a little bit to do this video. So we'll jump right in. Honestly, obviously the biggest difference is a physical difference, so I just want to go right into that. Just to start off, the Nexus 6 does have the slightly larger 5.96 inch screen with the 1440p resolution that gives it 493 pixels per inch, whereas the Note 4 has the slightly smaller screen at 5.7 inches, but since it has the same resolution, the pixels per inch goes up to 515. So it does have a few more pixels per inch, but honestly, it's kind of hard to tell the difference in just pixels per inch since they are so close. The other difference is the Nexus 6 is bigger. It's longer, wider, thicker. It's a bigger phone. In fact, you can completely hide the Note 4 behind the Nexus 6, which is kind of impressive. So I mean, that means that it translates to when you're holding it. In my opinion, the Nexus 6 does feel physically heavier, even though it's actually only 8 grams heavier. It feels heavier when you're holding, both in your hand, comparing both. The other thing that you really notice when you're holding them, one in one hand and one in the other, is the backs. So the Nexus 6 has that soft touch back. I happen to have the cloud white version, and it feels really, really nice. Whereas the Note 4 has that faux leather feel, which in my opinion, the soft touch feels a lot better. But I think that's also a personal preference. The other big difference in holding them is that the Nexus 6 is curved. So it has this ergonomic grip, I guess is what you would call it, compared to the Note 4, which is flat, which is actually really nice when you put it down on a desk. Because as you can see, when you put the Nexus 6 down on a desk and you try to use it, it makes it really difficult because it just rocks back and forth because of the curve. Whereas the Note 4 kind of sits there and it lets you use it maybe if you're sitting at your desk and want to use it flat. The other thing, as far as physical differences, the big one is speakers. The Nexus 6 does have 2 front-facing stereo speakers, which gives it awesome sound, whereas the Note 4 only has 1. But, not many people listen to speakers on their phone. Most people are Bluetoothing it to a speaker using headphones, so that's not a big difference, but it is a physical difference because you can see the speakers on the top and the bottom of the Nexus 6. It actually gets confusing trying to figure out which one is the top and which one is the bottom when you're pulling it out of your pocket. The other thing is the buttons. So the Nexus 6 does have the on-screen buttons compared to the Note 4, which has those physical buttons. So I think the biggest difference here is once again personal preference. But what this does mean is that the Nexus 6 actually has a smaller physical, usable screen. Just because, than it should. You can't actually use that whole 6 inches because of those screen-on buttons. And, obviously there's the big software difference. Right now, the Nexus 6 did ship with Android 5.0, so it's got stock Android. I absolutely love it. I'm not going to do a review on Android 5.0 because there are plenty of other ones. In fact, MKBHD did a great video on the top features. I can link that below. But the Note 4 is running 4.4.4 with TouchWiz on top of it, and it's supposed to get Android 5.0 by the end of the year, which should be really exciting. I'm really excited to see what Samsung does with that. As far as what makes the phones unique, the Note 4 does have a few options that Nexus phones really haven't ever had. It has the IR blaster, it has the removable back, which gives you a removable battery as well as the expandable memory. For me, that's never been a big issue. The biggest reason is because I'm not going to carry around a spare battery with me. I have a little USB bank that I can use if I really need an extra battery. And as far as the expandable storage goes, I have unlimited data right now on T-Mobile, so I can just stream everything. Whereas maybe if you're on a plan with AT&T or Verizon or any carrier where your data is limited, I can completely understand wanting to have more expandable storage, because it gives you room to put, your pictures, your music, any movies if you're going on a long trip, that kind of thing. So those are all physical differences, and the software differences there. I think that that's a big difference as well, but like I said, I'm not going to really get into that. So I already mentioned the screen. I talked a little bit about the size and the pixel density, but the other thing I wanted to mention is the brightness. So both phones do look great at max brightness, and the Nexus 6 with Android 5.0 does have the adaptive brightness. I've only had the phone for a few days. I'm not exactly sure how well that works, but I'll go into more depth in that on the Nexus 6 review. And the Note 4 does have the traditional auto brightness. But this is the big thing that I want to point out as far as brightness goes. When you put both phones down to the minimum brightness, some people are claiming that it's a feature on the Nexus 6 for the tint to go to a pinkish salmon color tint when you go all the way down. It's supposed to be, you know, easier to read at night, maybe when you have your phone all the way on minimum brightness. I disagree. I think the pinkish salmon color is really, it's not pretty. It doesn't look good. It puts a weird tint on it. And I can also just, I mean, by looking at them, the Note 4 also does go, it goes less brightness. It has less brightness. It goes much darker than the Nexus 6 does. And so I think it's important to point out, in case you are using it at night, you're using it in a low light situation where you want it to be, you know, very, very low light, very low brightness. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is the differences in the camera. So both do have optical image stabilization, and actually the Note 4 does have 3 more megapixels. It has a 16 megapixel camera on the back compared to the Nexus 6's 13 megapixel camera on the back. Just in some personal tests of mine between the two, they both take great pictures. As you can see, I feel like the Note 4 actually takes slightly brighter pictures. So the Note 4 it seems like it would do better in a low light situation. Several people have, you know, different bloggers, that kind of thing, have said that the Note 4 has the best camera on the market for an Android phone. The iPhone cameras are very, very good. The iPhone 6 Plus camera is, in my opinion, absolutely amazing. So the Note 4 doesn't come quite there, but the Note 4 camera I feel like is definitely better than the Nexus 6. But the Nexus 6 is a huge improvement over the Nexus 5, and it does still take great pictures. You know, those are really the big differences. They have the exact same specifications as far as, you know, the processor, the graphics, all that kind of thing. And so when it really comes down to it, it comes down to the physical look, it comes down to the software, and then it comes down to a few very small features. One of those, which I didn't mention before, is that the Note 4 does have the S Pen, that stylus, that the Nexus 6 does not have. And I think that that is a big personal preference, whether you actually would use that or not. Like I said, I'm borrowing my friend Paul's Note 4, so I haven't had a chance to really use that stylus much. But I know that he loves it. I know that he loves handwriting notes, use it to take screenshots, that kind of thing. So that is something to keep in mind as well. Overall, they're both great phones. If you want a phone that, you know, is going to have stock Android, then obviously you're going to go with the Nexus 6. If you want a phone that has great battery life, I didn't really talk on that just because I haven't really had either phone for long enough, but I have heard, you know, seen on the internet from several different reviewers that the Note 4 does have really, really good battery life, whereas the Nexus 6 is just kind of average. I've seen people getting 6 to 7 hours of screen on time with the Note 4 compared to 3 to 4 hours with the Nexus 6. So that's actually a really big difference, obviously just depending on your usage. But other than that, that was the comparison. I'd be happy to answer any questions, so feel free to post them in the comments. And hit subscribe if you liked it, and we'll have more videos coming out soon. Thanks!